nun, everybody called Annie Marilyn. She used to be a photographer, American photographer, for some magazine, like, a well-known magazine. And she came to Nepal to make a coverage on Tibetan lamas or something like that. So she interviewed Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, make photos and wrote an article, and she never left. She became a nun and she stayed there until her death. She died not that long ago.
Marilyn something.
Marlene, yeah. Marlene, can't remember her last name, but she was a very well-known photographer in America. She worked for, I can't remember the name of the magazine, but it's a very well-known magazine in America.
So she is probably responsible for some good pictures of
Rinpoche. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I heard Khandro Rinpoche talking about this first wave of Buddhists to whom some of us, the generation to whom some of us belong, as we were very idealistic, all the hippie generation, we were very idealistic, and I think people were ready to just give their lives to something that was interesting. And nowadays maybe it's a bit more difficult. In those days it was kind of easy, especially if you were young.
Yes. Actually, I have to show you one picture I found from Facebook. This is Lama Zopa Rinpoche with the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe.
Oh, okay.
When he got out of the monk training.
Okay.
So the first time they met afterwards.
All right. So, that's interesting.
Oh, wow. Nice photo. Nice photo.
So it's
okay. So what is this now? The meeting is being recorded. Okay, got it. All right. So maybe we do just a few minutes of meditation. We don't do anything. We just relax. So we take a deep breath and then come back. Ever we went somewhere. Okay. Okay, so I know we all, I don't know. I think we all familiar with different stages of the process of dying, but just for the record, we call them dissolutions. And the word is a little bit misleading in the sense that when we say earth dissolves into water, is not to take literally. It's not like the earth is dissolving into water. What happens is, according to the Buddhist medicine, for instance, or not only just Buddhist or not only Tibetan, but I think in the old days people saw the world was decomposed by the 5 elements or the 4 elements, and there are the outer or grosser elements, and then the subtle aspects of those elements which compose our body: earth, water, fire, and air is something that our body is composed by, meaning the more mineral aspects like bones, nails, hair, and all of that is part of the earth element. Then water is, no need to explain, we are composed by 75% or more liquid water. Then heat or fire is what is even the sign that we are alive. If you touch somebody and it's cold, then he's dead. So digestion and all of the combustion is fire, and then air, it's breathing, and we can't survive without breathing. So all of this is pretty much straightforward. Now, when we say that those elements dissolve, what it actually means is that when all the elements are in balance and working properly, the body supports the consciousness in the way we were explaining in the beginning. The body and the consciousness are so interconnected while we are alive that the body is the support for the consciousness when in this form of a human life, for instance. So when they collapse, or say that each element in turn stops being able to sustain or support the consciousness, then we say it dissolves. And so it sort of, when the element earth is no longer capable of sustaining or supporting the consciousness, then the next one after that, going from the grosser to the most subtle, is water. And then water, and it in turn collapses or stops being able to support the consciousness. So the next after that is fire, or the heat, and so on. Then fire dissolves into air, air dissolves into consciousness, and consciousness dissolves into space. And this is the first set of dissolutions, which are called the outer dissolutions. So there are several types of experiences that the one who is going through the experience, who is going through that, those dissolutions, which also, as I said, happen when we fall asleep. We have different experiences, like the sense of visual experiences, like fireflies or things like this. It's all explained in the texts. And also the sensation, which is very familiar to all of us, of falling. That's part of one of the dissolutions, when earth I think it's when water dissolves into air, something like that. We feel like we're falling down the stairs, or when we are falling asleep, that is one of the sensations that we often have, like we are missing a step or we're falling into a hole or something like that. Is one of them. But the other ones, sometimes when we fall asleep, it happens so quickly we don't recognize them, and in the end of the process, so we start dreaming. So, but when we are dying, the same process happens. Perhaps depending on our physical state, it can be quicker or longer each step. If we die very suddenly, those dissolutions still happen, but we will not be able to recognize them because they just go very quick. Like if a heart attack, or we die in a car crash or something like that, or from a bullet or something like that, is very quick. But if we have been ill for a long time and our body is weakened, then the process might take a while. They say in the text, it can take the time of a meal. Depends if you eat quickly or take a long time, but it gives an idea. It can go on for like half an hour or something like this, or sometimes they say it can even start one or several days before, the first dissolutions. It depends. Anyway, those are the outer dissolutions, which deal with the outer elements and things more grosser, we would say. Then there comes the what they call the inner dissolutions, and that has to do with the essence of the white and red essence that are connected, or they are the subtler aspects of our father and mother initial cells. So when we are conceived, there's a masculine cell and a feminine one that come together, and from there proliferates. But that initial cell probably gets transformed or eliminated because our body renovates every 7 years. But the subtle aspect of that initial essence still remains in our subtle body as a white, what they call the white essence being the masculine one, and the red essence being the feminine one. And they, as we grow as a fetus, as we grow, they then go and settle in the white one in the forehead, in the chakra of the forehead, and the red one in the chakra or below the navel. And so they remain in those centers during our lives. All of this is not physical. You can't open a body and find the chakras and the essence and things. It's an energetic level. So what happens then after all the outer dissolutions are finished and the consciousness dissolves into space, then the white essence, it generally is depicted like first the white essence and then the red one. But I've heard Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche saying that it could be the other way around, because white is connected with anger, and the masculine is connected with anger, and the red one is connected with attachment. So if you were a person that whose personality was most around anger, then the white one will start first. But if you were somebody who was very connected with attachment, then the red one might start first. I have never seen that anywhere except on that sort of pith instruction by Khyentse Rinpoche. But anyway, whichever one starts, the white one descends inside the central channel and stops above the chakra of the heart. And then there's the experience of a white light or a white sky, like just before dawn. You know, just before dawn, the sky becomes very clear, but it's a sort of diffused light. It doesn't come from a source. It's just white, it's pure, cloudless sky. Then the red essence rises from the navel center along the central channel and stops underneath the heart chakra. So now you have the white one above and the red one below, and they're not inside the heart. And when the red essence rises from the navel center, we have the experience of an orange or red light, like a sunset, you know, but again, not like from a source. It's just that the sky, when the sky is perfectly cloudless, and then there's this yellow, or not yellow, orange light. That's the experience you have when that red essence rises from the navel center. Oh yeah, I forgot to say that when the white light descends, all anger disappears. They say in the text that even if we saw the most hated thing, we wouldn't feel any hatred. It's all the hatred or aversion dissolves, disappears. We are aversionless. And when the red one rises and we have the experience of the orange light, then all attachment dissolves. And if we saw even something that we mostly desired during our life, we wouldn't feel any attachment at all. Then so that's 2 stages. Then the third stage now is then when both white essence and red essence enter the heart, and they collapse into each other, sort. And that's when we experience what they call the black light. It's when we go back to the beginning, actually. We will see that. But the white and the red one collapse, and then we have the experience of like a night sky. It might sound bizarre to say the black light, but when we look at the sky, even if we are in the middle of the countryside, not with the city lights or anything, but we are in the middle of the countryside, then even without stars, there's still some sort of luminosity in the dark sky of the night. It's not pitch black. There's some sort of luminosity there. And that's when all the aversion, all the ignorance dissolves. So there's no conceptual or separation or duality or anything, and all of that dissolves. And so that's the last of the inner dissolutions. And after that, we experience then the clear light, which is another bardo. It's the bardo of Dharmata. So it's interesting because, see, proportionally, we might think that it makes sense talking about the bardo of life because it lasts like 80 years or something. But then the bardo of dying just lasts for 15 minutes. But it is so important, you know, because this whole process, if we can go through it in a relaxed way, going back to this idea, then we are at the end of this process, while after the outer dissolutions and the inner dissolutions, we are just face to face with our own nature. You know, that same thing that we trained to be resting on is there. You know, everything else just disappeared. And that is why the moment of death for a practitioner, Buddhist practitioner, committed Buddhist practitioner, is such an opportunity. As Rinpoche was saying this summer, and it really caught my ear, they were saying, actually, it's a very important moment because when we are still connected with this body, this body is a karmic body. So there's lots of complexities that are connected with our genes, with our, you know, with our condition, the physical condition, that prevent or that make it resting in the nature more difficult, because we have all these habitual patterns are also very connected with the body. But in the moment we lose the body, and it's fully disconnected at the end of all the dissolutions, the mind and the body are now disconnected. So then it's much easier, because we don't have to deal with all the karmic things connected with the body. So we are at a sort of crossroads where attaining enlightenment in that moment is much easier than during the lifetime. And that's why, makes sense if you're a committed practitioner at some point to prepare for death, because it is such an opportunity. It's really a crossroad where we can benefit from a very specific and a very powerful moment to really see to really come face to face with our awareness, our pure awareness. If we fail that, then we have that opportunity, and we can enter the state of meditation and then just remain in that. If we are trained in the Bodhisattva way, then we remain that until we find another body where we can then help beings. And as it is said, if we really have the Bodhisattva motivation, and if we really have that kind of realization, we can then see apparently in some kind of form, I don't know exactly what form it takes, but see where we should be reborn to be the most auspicious or the most favorable situation, family or whatever, even gender. Sorry about that. Because nowadays maybe it doesn't matter so much, but in the old days when women didn't have the same kind of freedoms that they have now, definitely being a man would be much easier. It's not because it is superior, but sorry to say that, but not because it's superior in itself, but because you had right to education and a lot of freedom and a lot of things that being a woman wasn't so easy. Nowadays, probably doesn't matter as much, depending where you're born. But if we're talking about the Western society, being a man or a woman in that sense doesn't matter, is not that make that much of a difference. But in the old days, so there are certain prayers where you pray to be reborn as a man, and sometimes the lamas feel the need to explain, but it makes a lot of sense. It's not necessarily discriminating, it's just stating a fact. It was easier to be born as a man than to be born as a woman in certain societies, in order for you to have the freedom to. In Tibet, the nuns were very ill-treated. We like to think of Tibetans in a very romanticized way, but it was not all of that. Actually, it was kind of bizarre, because the Tibetan society, the lay Tibetan society, was and still is, women have a lot of freedom, much more than in other Asian countries. But because they imported the monastic system from India, where women didn't have all that freedom, the nuns in Tibet were more ill-treated than the general feminine population, which is so bizarre. But they were the servants of the monks many times. It's very recently that they can become kenmos or something like that, feminine kenpos. This level of education didn't exist in Tibet unless for very exceptional cases where they would be recognized as tulkus or something like that. But that was very rare.
How was it when in the Buddha's time, in the
Indian society?
Yeah, when Buddha started teaching, and there was some female.
Yeah, but it's not immediately. It was a big struggle actually, okay. Because apparently he had just had some troubles because he accepted some low caste guys in his community, and that had been a scandal in itself.
Yeah.
And right after that, his mother and stepmother and aunt and wife and other women, noble women from the family and things, wanted to become nuns, and he first refused.
Right.
Not because they couldn't become nuns or they couldn't practice the Dharma, but because he was already having some sort of scandal. He couldn't afford to have a second one going on.
Okay. So it was like social
pressure.
Yeah,
social pressure. He was accused during his lifetime of disrupting the Indian society. We don't know that part, but because of this, he was obviously going against the caste system.
Yes.
Yeah. So then the women decided to. He was staying somewhere, and they decided it was kind of far away, and they decided to go to all go barefoot and shave their hair and sort of confront him. Now we want to become nuns. And then Ananda was the one who really insisted that he would accept them. And he said something like, yeah, okay, it's tricky, but he ended up accepting them. But still with conditions.
Yeah.
So one of the things was that they definitely had a lower rank.
Okay.
And still nowadays in Tibetan monasteries, if there is a procession or something, you will have the monks ordered by an senior or in senior order, not by age, but how long they've taken refuge. So you get the older monks and the less and then the tiny kids and then the women. Yeah. Well, I don't know why we started talking about that.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point of view, because I remember some Lama giving a teaching. He said an interesting. He was talking about this Bardo and everything, and he said that our consciousness does not have a gender. So
Absolutely.
that doesn't really matter which.
It doesn't. And in many Vajrayana teachings, they will tell you that women are even superior in many things. They have higher capacities. But in terms of society, because they had this role as mothers and caregivers, basically, they were more indispensable in society, and then the families were more resisting letting go of a girl than letting go of a boy in Tibet. Even the woman can always be helpful. Can always be useful. She can cook, she can clean, she can take care of the sick. So there was but that's not only that. But you still see nowadays, in the lay Tibetan society, women have a lot of power. It's very common. You see a couple in the market. He goes in the front, but she has the money. She says what he can buy and what he cannot buy. So they are actually among Asian people, Tibetan women had much more freedom and power than other, like Japanese, for instance, or especially Indian. But because of the monastic system coming from India, they brought that idea that women weren't as independent. So it is a bit bizarre in the way it goes, but that's it. Anyway, the idea is that if you have a certain degree of realization, then at that stage in the Bardo, once you enter a state of resting in the natural mind or something like that, you can then see things and see like where would be the best place or the best situation to carry on with your motivation of being a bodhisattva and helping beings. And that includes, of course, having a good education and, you know, conditions in order you can do your practice and things like this. And so maybe being a man in those days especially was a better situation. Okay, so this is the part of the bardo of the moment of death.
Joo, totta kai. Yeah, can she ask?
Sure, of course.
Siis onko Bardosta tultava tietoiseksi niin kuin kuollessaan, jotta voi ylipäätään sen kokea, että meneekö se niin kuin muussa tapauksessa täysin ohi?
Do you have to be aware when you're in the bardo so that you can experience it, or otherwise does it just pass very quickly with you unconscious?
Okay. Well, all these dissolutions, as I said, happen every day. If we normally we don't recognize them because they pass very quickly, and that might also happen when we are dying. When we become aware, it's a bit like almost like we slow down, not really slow down the process, but because we are aware, we can see it happening. So that makes it easier. But in the end, the most important thing is actually being as aware as we can. But the dissolutions will happen anyway, whether we are aware of them or not, and we will end up in this clear light, whether we notice it or not. Again, if we have been trained, if we have been training in recognizing the nature of the mind and resting a little bit in it and so forth, it will be easier to recognize the clear light. Otherwise, it will be just a glimpse, and we will not be able to rest in it. But that's okay. We've been through that a lot of times, and we're still here. So even if we don't recognize it, then that doesn't mean we cannot get enlightened in the bardo. We have at every step there is an opportunity, like during lifetime, you know. If we at the moment of the clear light, if we can recognize, we can get enlightened. But then if we can't, what comes next? It's another opportunity, a different one. Okay.
Isn't it also because this is kind of, the liberation through hearing or something, so that we receive these teachings, so then we can become aware of the Bardos
Exactly.
more easily.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the famous Book of the Death, which is a totally free translation. The original title in Tibetan was the Bardo Tu Drul. And Bardo, I mean, now you know what it means. And Tu means hearing, and Drul means liberating. So what it meant was that it was a sort of guide that could help you recognize the different stages of the Bardo through hearing. So somebody would read it for you. It's like a GPS, you know. Somebody was reading to you and you could recognize what was happening, the experience that you're having with the reading of the passage that corresponding to what was happening in your experience, supposedly. So that's why. Now the next phase is where it says, now this is the bardo of Kema. Now when the bardo of Dharmata is dawning upon me, I will abandon all fear and terror, recognizing whatever appears as the natural display of awareness I will know it to be the way this bardo unfolds. Now that I have reached this momentous, crucial point, I will not fear this natural manifestation, the peaceful and wrathful deities. Right, that's it, the peaceful and wrathful deities. So if I can't remain in meditation in the clear light of the natural awareness of mind, of the nature of mind, then now if in everyday experience, when we get to this point, then we start dreaming. If we can't rest in the nature of mind, in the process of falling asleep, what comes next is that we start then dreaming. And the dreaming comes from the habitual tendencies that are stored in the alaya. So it can be, sometimes our dreams talk about things that happen during the day or the day before, or something we heard somewhere or something. Sometimes it comes from much older habitual tendencies or much older imprints that are stored in the alaya, in the storehouse of the alaya, and then sometimes we really wonder where this comes from. But anyway, that's where it comes from. So the same thing happens when we die. At this stage, then, the habitual tendencies that are stored in the alaya will appear as sort of dreams. That's why often this bardo of the Dharmata, he is often compared to the dream state, because we will have the same kind of things that appear. Now, of course, what is stated here is talks about deities, and in the Bardo Todrol, there is a description for every day after the death. It normally starts by, when you're reading it for somebody who died, you start saying, so and so, they say the name of the person, you're dead. That's the first thing. Remember that you died. And then this is the first day, and you will see this and that and that and that. Now, the thing is, for the deities to appear in the form that we recognize, those are energies that are part of our unconscious mind, but they won't necessarily appear to us in the shape of Vajrasattva or whatever those deities, unless we have practiced them so much that they became habitual tendencies stored in our unconscious mind. Otherwise, they will appear, but not necessarily that the energy will appear, but we won't necessarily recognize them as such. So that's why reading the Tibetan Book of Death for a Christian person, for instance, doesn't make any sense. You will not see Vajrasattva or Tara or something like that. You will see something else, Jesus, I don't know, Mother Mary, somebody else. And a cat will see a mouse or a dog or something that was stored in his mind during the life. So that's why when they say here, we sort of praying so that we don't fall in the terror of these manifestations, is apparently there's lots of sounds and lights, and it can be very dramatic, these things that manifest, and like very vivid dreams, very real, where things can, because we are in a sort of a shaky place. It's not like we are walking down our familiar street and seeing familiar faces and say, hi, how are you? We are in a totally unknown territory we're not familiarized with. So if there is loud sounds or things like this, it can be a little scary and put us in a more sort of shaky place. So that's why it comes again and again, the remembrance that everything that we're seeing is our mind. So, of course, if we have spent our entire life believing 100% in a very physical and material world, it will be difficult then to realize that this is all a projection of our mind. That's why in the teachings that we keep finding this advice to also I think it's even in the mind training. There is this line in the 7 points of mind training. There is this line that says, between sessions, see everything as illusion. Because if we train while we are alive, it will be much more easy in the bardo that to then look at things as the display of our own mind instead of seeing them as very real and solid. Because even though we speak of those things as hallucinations, it's from a certain perspective. Because when we will be experience them, they won't feel like hallucinations, like unreal or something. It will feel very real. And that's why, having this keeping in our mind that this is not as real as it seems in the everyday life, and getting familiarized with this idea that all we see is a perception. It's not as solid as, it's our mind's perception, not that it doesn't exist in any form, shape, or in any in any way, but not that we are just inventing or creating this world, but it is not as solid as we might perceive it. So if we get accustomed to that thinking, then we can also bring it to that specific situation and be able to understand that those sounds and those visions and the things we see are also the display of our own mind. They can't harm us in any possible way. Yeah, to start with, we are already dead, so there's nothing more that can happen to us, right? And so the Bardo Tutorial is this, so it goes for 49 days, actually, and depicting every step of the way what you're probably experiencing. But it will, especially when it comes to this, because the deities will appear and all, because those deities, how can I say, they express energies that don't have a shape. So they can appear with any kind of shape. It's only because we became accustomed to see the energy that corresponds to Vajrasattva as Vajrasattva. You understand the difference? That we will see it like that. Somebody else might see it as Archangel Michael, or I don't know, because that's what they're accustomed to. If we were Egyptian from ancient Egypt, we will see it as Horus or something. I'm just saying names. I have no idea, but you understand what I mean. So a Christian person will not see Vajrasattva sitting with the bell and the Vajra. Will not, unless if there is some other, in the previous lifetime or something like that.
Just a very short question. So would seeing them in those forms require doing 100 digit practice or something like that?
There are, when you have them in the Nyingma tradition. I don't know about the Kagyu, but in the Nyingma tradition there is what's called the Shi Tro. Shi means peaceful and Tro means wrathful. So there is this practice of the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities that is supposed to prepare for the vision of the visions in the Bardo. But I think from our perspective, from my perspective anyway, Vajrayana is so vast and so complex. I think we better stick with sort of one deity or something like that, unless we really have a very exceptional. We've had the opportunity of practicing all of these deities and things. If you can remain calm in an attitude of bodhicitta and compassion and wisdom, and perhaps if you have one deity, that would be my advice. if you really have one deity that you've been practicing, stick with it, especially towards the end of our lives. Not meaning that you shouldn't do anything else, but, keep, because the more that will be in your unconscious mind, the best chances that it will come up at that time. They say, for instance, that sign of, I said that yesterday, signs of realization come in the dreams, because that's when it means that if it comes in the dreams, it means that it's in your habitual tendencies. So it's in the unconscious. So the likelihood of it coming up in the bardo is greater. So I think it's a good approach. I don't know. Maybe people will disagree with me, and that's fine. This is my take on it. I think I will stick mostly with one deity and try to get really the connection so that it really can stick with me in that situation. Now, of course, if we have been practicing this since we are 3 and we have the opportunity of maybe in the next lifetime or something to practice the shitro, the peaceful and wrathful mandalas and things, then things might be different. But for now and for me, I would do like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
This question that came up was that when we, like here in this live, in this room here, we experience everything as really concrete.
Mm-hmm.
And for like somebody to say, okay, this is just your imagination or hallucination, or like it doesn't really exist, it would sound kind of far-fetched for a lot of people. And what I've found having discussions with some other practitioners, they understand this all things well. They understand everything, and then there are beings with form, without form, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But
there is a little kind of a catch there when they say, but in this real life, when we do this in this experience in real life, and then I say, like, okay, this what we call real life is not more real than a life of a god with no form, or whatever different realm of being. And that seems to be sometimes a little bit difficult for people to say. They kind of think of either it's like just like a metaphor, or then it's something so bizarre that they can really think. But the experience is what it is. And
it's the experience, because I sometimes I'm interested in some near-death experiences, for instance. So people come back from a near-death experience and they start telling how things are. And that's ridiculous, because in a sense, how can they be sure that things are like that? They can recount their experience, and for them, whatever they saw, the tunnel of light, meeting the grandmother, and that was real. But that doesn't guarantee that everybody's going to have the same kind of experience, because experience is just that, experience, and it's very subjective, even within real life. Like the way each of one of us experiences this room and this moment is totally different. We can't compare, of course, because I don't know what you're experiencing and you don't know what I am experiencing. And even if we use words, we're not sure we're meaning the same thing. Red for me is maybe not the same as red for you, because we use this word for an experience, and there's no way any one of us can compare and say, okay, so when you say red, you're saying the same thing as you're seeing the same thing as me. So that's the thing. When we are experiencing real life or dreams or bardo reality or anything, it is real for us. It doesn't mean that it corresponds to something that exists in a solid and concrete and especially outside of us. Now, quantum physics is helping a lot, because they say that, you know, even the observer influences the reality, how the particles react depends on if there is an observer and if there isn't. And even now I've seen some research about the intention, you know, so the intention also apparently has an effect on how these light particles react or gather or something like this. So, but still, it's the truth of the matter is that you're here, you're experiencing it as a very solid reality. But if we choose, and if we start experiencing this room with a more meditative awareness, like we were talking, then suddenly there's more space. It becomes lighter, isn't it? We can switch from one to the other very easily. You can experience this room as a very solid thing, and then you go into a more meditative, and then suddenly it is lighter. So this is a step towards the sense of this not being as solid as we might experience it in a non-meditative awareness. So it's just a degree further. And all of these things that we can experience in life and in Bardo, when we are experiencing them, they're very real. So of course, relatively speaking, you can say it's a hallucination, but then you can say the same from what we are experiencing right now.
That's my point, yes.
If we are talking, if a God is talking to another God right now, you might say, yes, human beings, they have the hallucination of being in Helsinki or something like that. Because that's it, you know, it's as real as that.
Yes, true.
Yes?
Minä muistan lukeneeni sellaisen. En ole varma, onko se Dalai Laman kirjasta jostakin, että ihminen voisi valaistua aivastaessaankin. Ja koska asun hyvin vetoisessa asunnossa ja aloitan aamuni, kun herään, nokka täys räkää 4 aikaan ja sitten alkaa aivastelut ja niitä jatkuu yli 10. Ja kun minä tunnen ropassani sellaiset pienet värähtelyt liikkeen, niin olin hyvin huvittunut, mahdankohan minä tässä nyt kohta puoliin valaistua. Ja sitten, koska mua kiinnostaa, siis ajattelen sen energiaksi yksinkertaisesti. Ja koska nyt tiedän, että ihmisen kehossakin on paljon sähkömagnetismia. Kiitos Maxwellin.
Now it's getting too long. She's read from maybe Dalai Lama's book or somewhere that you can get enlightened even when you're sneezing. And she's sneezing a lot in the mornings because she's living in a cold apartment. And sometimes after 10 or a dozen sneezes, she is wondering if this slight kind of vibration on her body is a sign that she's
getting enlightened. Yeah, well, that's the thing. They say that actually there are a few moments while we are alive where we can experience the clear light, and sneezing is one of them. Sneezing, the orgasm is another one, and there might be others, but I don't really remember. Yeah. In French, there was this ancient expression for the orgasm called the small death or the little death. Because it is a moment where you experience the clear light, and sneezing is another. That's why in every country, when somebody sneezes, people tend to say something, bless you, or, you know, because there's this idea that it might be a moment of death.
And Tibetans say Tsering.
They long life, yes. They say long life. In Portuguese, you say santinho means holy, you know, something like that. You're holy.
We say that something like, may you be healthy.
Right. That's it's not for no reason. It's because people actually intuitively knew that sneezing is a little, there's something into it that can approaches death or something like that. Don't we worry, I sneeze a lot in the morning, but I haven't gotten enlightened yet. But I think that's the reason. That's the reason.
Sitten se sähkömagnetismi. Kun tiedetään, että ihmisen kropassa on sähkömagnetismia, onko siitä mitään tietoa, että se olisi mukana tässä kuolinprosessissa, ja jos niin millä tavalla? Siis EKG ja EEG sitten loppuvat tietyssä vaiheessa, siis sähköinen sydänkäyrä ja aivokäyrä, niin mitä ajatellaan tänään sähkömagnetismista?
So you know what they say about the electromagnetism of human body, and how is this connected to this death process? I mean, the brain, EKG and EEG, they stop at some point. How is this connected with electromagnetism?
I don't know. I don't know.
Like Tukta, when they are in Tukta, then there's been some kind of measurements. So
And they're not there. There's no brain activity.
Yeah.
Because it's subtler than that. You know, even the most subtle machines nowadays still can't catch these more subtle aspects of the mind. I have participated in some scientific studies as a guinea pig for the effects of meditation. And one of the machines in which I spent 2 hours was a machine where, you know, everybody has seen when they put electrodes, and I did that too. But there was another machine where there was no contact whatsoever. I was sitting in a chair and I had to be, I couldn't move a muscle for 2 hours. That was the hard part. And there was this huge machine, like it's really, like you remember the hair dryers in the 60s, where you put your head inside to, you know, when you went to the hairdresser. But really big like this. You have to sit in a room that has to be, that is shielded, even from Earth radiation, is as subtle as that. And you put your hand in that machine and it touches nothing. But the machine is so sensitive that it can still record brain activity just from the electric waves, the electromagnetic waves around your head. There's no electrodes or anything stick on your head. But still, even that, you know, can only go as far as, as far as electromagnetic waves, but the consciousness goes beyond that. There's other frequencies. So, you know, it's difficult for the technology that we now have to be able to detect and record these more subtle things. And then also, on the other hand, when we try to crisscross different views, it's not always possible. It does not necessarily correspond because it's a different take. You're looking from another perspective. So it's not easy to say this corresponds to this. You see, we're talking about different levels and things, and it's complex. Because I think these energies that we're talking about, they go beyond electromagnetic. They are at an even subtler level. In some traditions, they talk about that we have, I don't know how many different bodies, you know, energetic bodies, going from the grosser in this machine to the subtler and subtler levels of energy. And that is difficult to make corresponding. We still don't have the technology. It's not saying that it's not possible, but we don't have the technology to sense these things. Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is the Bardo of life now. Kiema. Douglas, sorry, I was going to read Tibetan. Kiema, now when the bardo of becoming is dawning upon me, I will concentrate my mind with single-pointed determination. Strive to prolong the results of good karma. Close the entrance to rebirth and try to keep from being reborn. This is the time when perseverance and pure perception are required. Abandon jealousy and meditate on the master and consort. So yeah, here that's when we start, we are in the bardo of becoming and we start looking for a new body. If we have missed all the precedent opportunities, then we come into this part where through the power of habitual tendencies, namely the habitual tendency of being connected with the body, which is very strong. You know, we know and we crave, once we are in this state of bardo, we crave the experience of a body because we have spent most of our lifetimes with the body. So that means eating, sleeping, you know, drinking, smelling, all these things that we can do when we have a physical body. And the stability that it brings, because the thing is, when we are in the bardo, it is said that if I think of Paris, I'm there. If I think of hell, I'm there. And that doesn't happen when we have a body. We still have to take a plane and buy a ticket and go to the airport, and it is not immediate. So like in the dreams, the experience of such flickering and reality can become very, very frustrating. So at some point in the bardo, we might crave a physical body in order to sort of stabilize, and also because that's what we used to have. And what it tells here is that it apparently says something like not entering into rebirth, which is, I don't exactly know how or why it says that. I suppose it's that if you manage to be in meditation, then you should sort of try to remain in meditation. But there's something here that I think it's important. I've read that somewhere and find that this is very important, because I'm sure you have heard before that when you enter when you start a new life and you enter the matrix of your next mother, if you feel attachment or attraction to the father and jealousy towards the mother, you are reborn as a girl. And if you feel attachment to the mother and jealousy towards the father, you're born as a boy. But then what it says here, and when it says abandon jealousy and meditate on the master and consort, is a skillful mean, imagining the mother, and it's not the master like our teacher necessarily, is some deity in union with his consort. It's the idea of, because if you enter a new life based on attachment and aversion, okay, we are dooming ourselves to go on in another lifetime where we are driven by attachment and aversion. You see what I mean? Whereas if you visualize a deity in union and then project your consciousness into the union of those two enlightened beings, you're not entering a new lifetime based on aversion and attachment, but based on bodhicitta, which is totally different. So you might not be reborn as a tulku, but you will be reborn with much less habitual tendencies of aversion and attachment, based on something else, based on the desire. Like if you manage to remain in this, if you haven't gotten enlightened until this point, and you're going to take another lifetime, then it's very important to, at that stage, keep in mind the bodhisattva vow of helping beings, and then enter a new life, not based in attachment and aversion, but based on the motivation to have a good rebirth to help beings. And it doesn't matter if you're born as a boy or as a girl, but especially not entering pushed or driven by any of these clashes. And that is the important thing here, I think, when we get to this stage. Again, to be able to get into this stage and still keep reminding ourselves of the bodhisattva path, and etc. That's why we need to practice. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it comes down to that. Whatever we look at it, it's still our sort of responsibility during our lifetime, when we can have all this, we have the stability that is given by a human body. So our life, even if our mind is all over the place, it's still sort of rooted in somewhere because we have this body. So there's some form of stability when we are alive that might not be there when we are dead. So it's now that we have to train ourselves into this, and every day and as often as possible remind ourselves of the bodhicitta intention and all of these things, because the more they're rooted in our stream of mind, the best. The more naturally it will come, without us having to make an effort. It will just naturally emerge in this situation. Okay, so next, the last stanza then says, with mind far off and no thought of impeding death, performing the meaningless activities of this life, to return empty-handed now would be utterly deluded. Recognize what is needed, the sacred Dharma. Why not practice it now, at this very moment? The great accomplished gurus have said, if you do not keep in mind your master's instructions, are you not deceiving yourself? So, yeah, this is basically what I just said, but said in a much nicer way. So if we live our lives with our mind far off, our mind totally distracted, and no thought that inevitably death will come, and we don't know when. It can be today, tomorrow, next day, or in 10 years, or we don't know. Performing the meaningless activities of this life. If we just focus on this lifetime, it might seem normal, but it's actually quite short-sighted. By the end of this life, then what? If you don't believe in anything else, that like most people don't, then doesn't even make sense speaking about after death or something. But that's not our case. And even if we're not sure, maybe in the doubt, maybe it's better to think that there might be something afterwards, so better prepare for that. We tend to make we sometimes make investments, like invest money to get some return in 10 years or something like that. Well, this is the best investment we can make. We put some money into some actions or into something in the bank, expecting some returns in 10 years. We don't know if it will work, but we try. So if we if we see our practice as an investment, it will have returns, and if it will have returns in the medium and in the short term, the medium term, and the very long term. So it's a good investment. So to return empty-handed now would be utterly deluded. So this last verse actually just appeals to the fact that it's now that we have the opportunity, and so it's now that we should do whatever we can without beating ourselves up, without feeling guilty, or that also is important. Sometimes the Tibetan teachers, because they had such a strong determination, as we were saying yesterday, their discourse might sometimes sound a bit too harsh or too extreme, but we should apply it to the extent of our capacity, and without becoming obsessed, or without becoming crazy, or without becoming stressed, especially, but at the same time not just laying back and saying everything will be okay. And we can test ourselves, something goes wrong in our life, how do we react? And imagining that just losing one thing has such a huge impact on me, how would it be when I will lose everything? So, realizing that it's true, I shouldn't stress, but at the same time, it's not going to be easy. So we should definitely prepare to live, not necessarily to die, but to live in the better way we can. And everyday's life's challenges can show us how far we have gone, how trained we are, how easy or difficult it is for us to let go of different things, and why also. Why does this make me so unhappy, or why does this make me feel so uncomfortable, and things like this. I mean, we're always learning, so it's actually quite a exciting process. A discovery, and learning process. And if we see it like this, and we take it with a bit of with some enthusiasm and some joy, then it's not at all the topic of death is not a problem. It's not depressing. Yes?
Menee kysymys tähän arkipäivän toimintoihin, kaikenlaisiin. Meaningless activities. Kun minä luulen, että minä huiputan itseäni. Käyn ostamassa ruokatarvikkeita, valmistan ruokaa, siivoan, vien roskat ja muuta. Niin sitten mä ajattelen mielessäni, että hyödyttäköön nyt tämä toimintani kaikkia tuntevia olentoja menneessä, nykyisessä ja vielä jotka eivät vielä ole syntyneetkään. Mä tiedän, että mä huiputan itseäni tällä tavalla. Vai onko tästä mitään hyötyä tällaisista kokemista silloin, kun vien roskia ja teen sapuskaa?
Well, she's doing everyday chores like buying food and making food and washing dishes. She's always kind of wishing that may this benefit all beings now and in the future and in the past and everything. But is she fooling herself?
Well, we have to eat to survive, and in order to eat, we have to cook, and in order to cook, we have to buy the food that we're going to cook, and that's inevitable. As long as we have a human body, we will have to clean and take a shower and wash our clothes and all of these things. We can think of them as being meaningless, but at the same time, it all depends on our way of doing them, performing them. Whatever we do, if we can think, like you were saying, if we can think that may this be helpful, or may I take care of myself in order to be able to take care of others, or whatever we find a way to make these things meaningful. They're not meaningful. They're not meaningless anymore. You know, it all depends on us. There are lots of stories about. Even there's this story about this woman who once made an offering to not this Buddha but the previous one. She didn't have anything to offer, so she just took a handful of dust, of earth, and offered it. And because of that, she was reborn as, I don't know what exactly, the God's realm or something like that. Because it is said that it is not the action itself that is the most important, it's the motivation that is behind. So there are lots of examples of things that, like, even of things that we can give meaning to even meaningless activities, and that is not fooling yourself. For instance, when we offer the mandala, you know, in the Nyondro, there's this part of offering the mandala. When there's this disc, and then we put the rice heaps on it and so on and so forth. And when we are, in the beginning, we are sort of purifying or cleaning the mandala. And we are supposed to visualize or to wish that we are cleaning the sort of the mind of all beings. So when you're washing your dishes, you can think the same thing. If you're washing dirty clothes, you can think that you're washing all the defilements and the clashes of all beings, because why not? So, you know, everything can become, we might say, okay, now this is a bit far-fetched. If you feel that way, that's okay too. But if you make sense of the things that you're doing in this sort of way, it becomes meaningful. Because the most important thing is how we envision things, what meaning we give to the things we do. And because this is the most important thing for us, in a sense, that if everything I do in the perspective of the Dharma, or in the sense of being useful, or being helpful, or seeing the truth, or something like that, that reinforces that in my mind. You know, it doesn't mean that now when I wash clothes, I'm going to stop the war in Israel or something like that. That will not necessarily happen, but it will. The fact that I think in this way creates a habitual tendency in my own mind. And then the thing is, we might think that transforming ourselves might sound very selfish. But in the end, when we really see the world where we live in, we can see that every war, every unkindness that every sentient being has, every human being has towards another, is just because he doesn't know who he is. And we can't show it to him like nobody can show it to us. So the only possible way of transforming the world is starting by transforming ourselves, seeing the truth about ourselves. So if each one of us does his part, then the world will become totally different. The wars don't exist because there is a shortage of this or that. The wars exist because the ones who are involved in war, whichever side they take, don't know who they are, what they are. So they don't know what the other is, and then this mistaken view brings about all the hatred, all the attachment, all the aversion, and all of those things, which every one of us has. So, unless and until all of us, I mean, at least part of us, see a little bit more clearly who we are and how mistaken these views, the clashes are, and so on and so forth, nothing can change. We have tried many systems and many political or economical systems, and nothing has worked so far because people have not changed. So the laws can't make anything because the first thing we think is how we can bend them, unless we know all of this. So sometimes I think people coming from other traditions, especially from the Christian traditions, where compassion and love and all of that is very active, and they help the wounded and all of this. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm not saying anything of this sort. But when you come from that perspective, then perhaps this idea of finding out who we are or what we are seems very selfish, or sort of like a bit autistic or something like that. But it's not in the end. It's not to say that we shouldn't do any good around us, but to say unless we have tackled that problem and unless we have really seen what we are, there's not much truth in whatever we do, and sometimes it's even worse in a sense. We're trying to do good, but it's not necessarily the case because it doesn't come from the truth. So compassion and especially empathy there's also a dark side to empathy. You can be very empathic to the ones that are similar to you from your club or from your side, and then be totally hateful to the other ones. So in order to be able to extend this and not take sides and all of that, then we have to work with ourselves and be closer to understanding what we are and what others are, and what this is all about, and how we are completely mistaken in our perceptions most of the time. So it's not at all it's not egoistical. It's just the only thing we can do. We can't change the world. I'm sure we have tried. We all have tried, but no, we can't even change our neighbor or even our spouse, let alone, people who live far away or something like that. So we have to start, when the Greeks said, know yourself, know thyself, they had a good point. And it was not go do some psychotherapy. It was deeper than that. It's not just know, your traumas or things like this. It was much deeper than that. Know exactly what we are and where all this comes from, That's it.
Bodhisattvas or Buddhas can change or it's at least it's told they can change the world, or things like Vimalakirti could make a whole palace of beings.
You mean change?
Yeah, the reality
things.
but
change the reality, but they can't change beings.
No. That's what I just recently heard from one teacher. He was teaching about Tonglen, and he said that very common doubt about Tonglen meditation for practitioners is that if I take other people's or other beings' harms and suffering for myself, something bad's going to happen to me, and then if I give something, I lose something. And he said that doesn't happen. That doesn't really happen. He said that it's mind training of a bodhisattva, the beginning of bodhisattva path, to make your mind, to work that way. To kind of change your mind.
Develop courage for a starter, and just reverse the habitual tendency of giving to others what you don't want and take for yourself what you want, the bigger piece of the cake, and then they can have the scraps. And Tonglen is just reversing that. That's why it's so scary, it's counterintuitive.
It is, yes.
Taking the things that you don't want and give what you want, that is just the opposite of what you normally do. But it is not necessarily going to happen. It's just training your mind for that, for accepting suffering as if you have chosen it. That is a very important point, because normally when suffering comes upon us, it's always undesirable. So our first reaction is to fight it, to push it away, and that creates more suffering. When you accept it, you actually accept dealing with it, then it's much less heavy than if you fight against it. So actually, when you train to accept suffering as you want it, you take it voluntarily as a choice, then you create the habit of accepting suffering more quickly and with less resistance. So it makes it much more easy. There's when in the 80s I was in retreat, and China for the first time really opened a bit. So Khyentse Rinpoche, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, got the chance to go back to his to Tibet in general, and he visited several places, among which his village. And he met with friends that he hadn't seen since he had left Tibet during the Chinese occupation. And there was this friend that he met with that had spent several years in a Chinese jail. And he and some other Tibetans, they had been tortured almost every day, and they were going crazy, with so much suffering and so much anxiety, because when you're in such a situation, it's not only when you're not only suffering when you're being tortured, it becomes a permanent torture, because you're now expecting the next round, and they were so desperate. And they weren't monks or lamas or anything. They were just regular lay people. But in Tibet, everybody at least heard some Dharma teachings at some point. So there was one of them who had this idea and said, we should practice Tonglen. So they started. And so they started doing, like, when they were taken for this sort of torture sessions, they would think, since we are suffering, so may all the suffering of all beings be sort of concentrated in our suffering, and by that, may they all be free of suffering. And then he said it changed completely our experience, because now it made sense. Now it had a purpose. Now, when we were taken for this torture sessions, we weren't feeling like we were being victims. It's like we had chosen to take upon ourselves the suffering of other beings, and it was not as painful, because now it had a meaning. We were actually doing something for the world, and that's what made it possible for them to even survive the situation. When I heard this story, I was kind of, oh my God, because you think it's such a simple exercise, but it is so powerful when you're confronted with extreme situations. Then something very simple can make a world of difference, because you're you don't have any other issue, so you focus entirely on that. That's why we, as we were saying, it doesn't matter. Of course, they couldn't relieve the suffering of other people, but it has transformed their attitude and their experience of suffering into something completely different. So this is a very strong, I think it's a very powerful story, because something so simple can override even something so horrible like being tortured in a prison. That says the power of mind. And also shows how such a simple exercise can be so powerful. Okay. Any more questions before we wrap up? No? No more poems? This series that existed when I was small, Pippi?
Peppi, yes.
She was Finnish, right?
No, she was Swedish.
Oh, Swedish. Okay.
It belongs to.
Yes. Yeah, it came as far as Portugal.
Okay.
I thought she was speaking. Yeah. Okay. She was Swedish.
She was Swedish.
She
But
was
she
not.
has an emanation, Peppi Pitkätossu, who is Finnish.
Translated.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. She was called in Portuguese. She was called Pipi of long stock or something like that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope any of this was helpful or will be. And yeah, that's basically it. Some of us have already met before, and perhaps we will meet again in some later stage. That is it. It's always a pleasure to share the things I've learned over the years and some small pieces of my own experience. And if it's helpful, then better yet. So thank you and see you sometime.